Okay, welcome back. It is late February 1874. It's been a few months since the last video then, and this constitutes our first quarterly report of 1874. I think we left off in, was it November last year? And no significant kind of developments, like internationally. I mean, the Austrians have gone to war in Serbia, you know, kind of predictable. I guess they're going to start making moves in the Balkans now. Our hands are tied with no access to any kind of diplomatic resources. So they've occupied Belgrade. They did at one point occupy Zagreb, our kind of satellite. It looks like they secured a peace with the Croatians, and it looks like they just have transit rights. I would imagine at some point they'll look to absorb Croatia, and they might even do the same with Serbia. And yeah, the big Austrian concentrations kind of, you know, like along the border. How long is peace going to last? I'm wondering. Let's have a look. How long we've got left. They might not declare war right away. I mean, actually, in the past, they've left it for some time. 9 turns. Duration 9 turns left. Yeah. So that's what, I don't know, 18 weeks, is it? So we could be looking at war this summer. Or autumn, I don't know, or maybe next year, I don't know. But it's sure to come. You know, we're going to expect it. We're continuing with the kind of military plan, which I mentioned in the last video then, which is to kind of upgrade and develop our fortifications. We're in the process of upgrading our fortress in Bucharest. It's going to take time, you know. We've begun the upgrade of a fortress in Montenegro. We haven't begun building the niche Pristina fortresses yet, but we have begun the process of upgrading the fortress. Is either expansion, so we're extending the fortress, then we'll upgrade it in Novi Pazar, and we are expanding our depots as well in Sarajevo. And the idea is, as I mentioned in the last video, to create a kind of cluster of fortresses that really slows the Austrians down. It attritions them, it compels them to take fortress after fortress in order to get seamless supply through. And if they assault those fortresses, that results in casualties, and that creates opportunities for counterattacks. We're building up our depots in our kind of quadrilateral system as well, and we're going to maintain our forces in these positions. There's really good direct rail access to the quadrilateral, so we're really happy with that. The naval expansion program kind of continues, and well, more on that in a bit, because I'm going to deliver a bit of an armed forces report. But the navy is mostly comprised, I think, now of ironclads. We have more ironclads than we have traditional Age of Sail or wooden screw ships, which is quite something. So we are now kind of very much an 1870s naval power, and that's really good to see. The economy's going quite good as well. I mean, the economy is, well, I say it's going good. I mean, expansion has slowed, but it was always going to slow at some point. We were always going to reach a bit of a ceiling in terms of, you know, the number of commodities that we could push and this sort of thing. I mentioned before that I was going to keep an eye on agricultural produce, specifically cereals, because we import a huge amount of coal, and some of it, at a premium price, and much of that coal, or at least a portion of that coal, is used to support what is now a mechanized agricultural sector, or an increasingly mechanized agricultural sector. As it is, I think my alarm was a little bit false. At this stage, we are selling slightly more units of cereals than we're producing. I mean, that won't be consistent, but whilst that remains a possibility, we're not going to touch the agricultural sector. I mean, tobacco, coffee, and opium, these are the things that we're always going to be able to push. So there's going to be no problem with that. Fruits and wines, we do have good access to fruits and wines, but because they both utilize fruit plantations, and we've kind of divided our fruit plantations between fruits and wines, we have about 50% surplus rate that we can export. Tropical fruits we don't have access to in Basra. Tea we have access to in Eastern Anatolia, although a lot of our tea is now grown directly in China in plantations controlled by Ottoman capitalists. But just recently we had a scripted event where we very suddenly lost access to 3 tea plantations in Fuzhou province. Only 3. We still have all of our timber sites. We still have a tea plant. Well, we've begun the construction of a tea plantation and a silk plantation in Shanghai. So we are going to continue, but it's okay. We expected that this might happen. There's probably only so many RGOs that you can control. We have okay relations with China, but they're not so good. I think the idea is if you have really good relations, and specifically if you have a commerce agreement, probably the sky's the limit. But we have like neutral relations with China. and we're building, you know, huge amounts of kind of RGOs or plantations inside China. So occasionally, I think China, the state, is going to intervene and basically seize control of these Ottoman plantations and put them over to Chinese state control. I guess, I don't know, control of the imperial bureaucracy or something. We've lost some of them, but that's okay. I mean, expanding the kind of expanding. Yeah, our import market for tea is good. I mean, allowing sort of more areas we can import tea is also beneficial to us. And it strengthens China, which provides a kind of geopolitical bonus. We're going to continue our investments in China. It's a good way of exporting capital, but we are going to do it with a careful eye on the amount of available private capital, because as you'll recall, about a year ago, we got ourselves in a bit of a pickle with inflation, where we basically tied up too much private capital to kind of developing RGOs in China. This meant that we didn't have enough capital to cover our operational costs, which resulted in heavy borrowing, which resulted in about, I think at the time, 4 points of inflation. I think at one point we had about 8% inflation. Inflation has leveled out now. It's within the area of acceptability. As long as it's under 5%, I'm basically happy. 4%'s okay. I'd like to see 3%. We can't manually control inflation, but deflation is going to be slowed down through the gold conversion system, which I've been running for more than a decade now, whereby the Ottoman Empire imports significant quantities of gold from Latin America, from places like Mexico, but we throttle the gold off on the domestic market. So on the domestic market, we have gold set to minimal availability for purchase. So this gold, whilst we're using private finance to buy the gold, it sits in state banks and accumulates interest, and that allows us to trickle gold into kind of into the state exchequer. So gold gradually converts. Now diamonds, we mine a lot of diamonds anyway. We have diamonds sat at 50-50. Even though it's sat, I should stop smoking it before I make these videos, because every time I make videos I have a smoker's cough. But yeah, it says 50-50, so 50% of our diamonds are set for conversion, but in reality that's not really the case. In fact, looking at the detail here, 11 units are set for national market sales, 6 are conversion. But national market sales for diamonds, as you can imagine, it's a really, really high-end commodity. It's a luxury commodity, yields a lot in terms of private capital, which in turn we can put into gold. So it's balanced positive for us to actually sell or shift a lot of gems on the export, not on the export market, on the domestic market. If it ever gets to the point where we just have more private capital than we need, even for sort of our capital export program with China, we'll probably throttle off. We'll do the same as we do with gold. We'll throttle off gems and convert that to state revenue. However, this does put pressure on any kind of natural deflation. There has been a bit of a natural deflation, but the more conversion that goes on in our economy, the more possibility of inflation. At some point, now we have a big economy. We have an economy that's so large now that we can convert. I mean, how many units of gold are we converting per term? So per fortnight, we're converting 6 units of gold plus 6 units of diamonds. So that's converting that straight into the state exchequer. So it's a really great system for us to basically offset some of the problems we have with regard to our administration, like our bureaucracy is based on cronyism and this kind of thing. You know, we've got restricted education. So we don't have like a very effective bureaucracy, which means our tax revenue collection is going to be, you know, compared to a power like Austria, it's going to be diminished. So we use the gold exchange system to allow us to have much more state revenue, which allows us to have a much bigger army. It allows us also to directly invest in the Academy of Sciences, which, you know, again offsets the fact that we're probably technologically quite backward. And at least in terms of military technology, because we can't be everywhere at once, but in terms of at least military technology, at the moment we're spending a lot of our money on maritime technology, but military technology, for the most part, we probably have something amounting to parity with the more developed Western powers like Britain and France and Prussia and the United States, and to a lesser extent Russia. But so we're kind of keeping pace, I think. Probably we're a little bit behind in terms of naval technology, but that, you know, these investments you can see now are starting to pay off, and we're really catching up. Now, I mentioned a few videos ago that I was going to try and get a rough idea of the overall size of the Ottoman army. Because I was kind of curious. I thought, how big is the Ottoman army, and how does it compare to real life? So I sat down for about half hour, 40 minutes, and went through kind of I'll take a lift all of these now. I went through all of the kind of list of forces, broke them down into different categories to try and get an idea of what portion of the force constitutes teeth arms, the field command, and basically counted out the size of the Ottoman army, which is not as hard as it sounds. So this is really the first Ottoman kind of army census, if you like, that we've conducted. And again, it's to give an idea as to how powerful we are militarily compared to the real Ottoman Empire over roughly the same period. And this is how the army breaks down. So I've broken the army down into kind of different sections to give an idea as to the functionality of that number of troops, and even within each category there are various other subcategories which I'll explain. So the first one, we've got the field army, mobile auxiliaries, and then we've got kind of like tier 1 and tier 2 auxiliaries. Now the field army are these mobile field commands that are put into stacks. So we've got the second army, fourth army. It basically ranges from the first army all the way through to the 8th army. There's a slight amount of variation in terms of the total number of troops in each army, as you can imagine. The composition is ever so slightly different. They have, in some cases, slightly different support elements, and they have different number of guns and this kind of thing. But counting them all up, and also including the strategic reserve, I can give you an idea as to the rough size. So the field army, comprised of 8 armies, has a total strength of 778,518 men. Now, including the reserve on its own is 112,675. So, including the strategic reserve, the entire field command, so these are the mobile units, okay, is about 891,000 men, 193. So, about 190,000 men, basically. That's pretty impressive. In addition to that, I didn't count cavalry because obviously men also ride horses, so these men include the cavalrymen. But artillery guns within the field army, including the reserve, comprises 4,804 guns. If you don't include the reserve, it's 4,376. So these, the kind of mobile field commands, from a bit of perspective, these are going to be mostly, they're going to be professional soldiers. They're mostly going to be overwhelmingly men in their 20s. They're going to be physically fit. They're going to be men, like young men, that can walk long distances day after day. Of course, their feet will blister like everyone else's, but they can do it day after day after day. They're physically strong. If they get wounds, they're much more likely to heal and this kind of thing. So they're going to be professional soldiers, mostly young, in their 20s. And that's the kind of, this is the best of our army. It's the mobile field commands. They're all organised, in fact, almost entirely, with the exception of independent artillery regiments and also cavalry divisions, which typically operate as independent sort of entities within stacks. But overwhelmingly, these forces will be organised into corps systems. So this number will include HQ administrative staff, but also the support asset units within each army stack. So this 890,000 men are not all infantrymen that carry sort of, rifles. They're going to include engineers, they're going to include military provosts, they're going to include field hospital staff, they're going to include logisticians, men that really are just assigned to sort of the logistical tail of the army. So, these aren't all teeth arms, but for the most part, they probably are. For the most part, I think probably 2/3 to 3/4 of these will be infantrymen, with many thousands being cavalry. But then the logistical tail, the support asset units, the provost, the aide-de-camps, the kind of administrative staff as well. So that's the kind of mobile field army. Now, within the mobile field army, within that number, so included in that number, is 197,250 soldiers that are spread over 7 corps of the Imperial Guard. You remember in the 1850s, I made a lot of noise about kind of wanting to replace the Janissaries, which did not exist by the time of the beginning of this campaign in 1850, but I wanted to resurrect them in spirit. The idea of having a really elite kind of center to each army. So the idea is that each army would be organized around a special army corps, which would be the Imperial Guard. Now, the army is so large that not every field command is. Out of our field commands, I think actually all of them, in fact all of them bar one, I think the 8th army, are all comprised of line corps. But the 1st to 7th army each have an Imperial Guard corps in them. So the Imperial Guard is dissipated throughout the army. So most field commands, like for example, as a kind of garden variety, the 1st army is 97 1,574 men, 462 artillery pieces. And about a third of that force is going to be kind of like Imperial Guard, or a quarter of that force will be Imperial Guard soldiers. So the Imperial Guard soldiers, as you might imagine, are going to be picked men. They're going to be, soldiers that might have been line infantrymen to begin with, but they've experienced some action. They've perhaps been on a campaign and received a medal. Perhaps they've seen repeated action, and in each case they might have performed very well under the sort of stress of combat, and so they've been kind of picked for an Imperial Guard regiment. So they might be former soldiers from line infantry. They might just be physically imposing young men. So they might be men that are very large, maybe standing over 6 feet, which in the 1870s is very rare. People are typically shorter, especially in a place like the Ottoman Empire, where their calorie intake as children would have been diminished. They're more likely to have parasites, so they're not going to grow to quite the same height. So they're going to be physically imposing men, large men, strong men, this kind of thing. Which again is quite rare for the period. Men are typically shorter and quite skinny. This is not just the case in the Ottoman Empire. This would also be the case in Britain, America, and France, and places like that. I mean, today anyone could be physically imposing by going to the gym, sort of thing, and pumping iron. But this didn't feature much in the 1870s. So physically imposing men will serve in the Imperial Guard, and I suppose also soldiers or young men that join the army that are maybe ideologically motivated. Maybe they are kind of like what we would consider kind of patriots today. They have some particular kind of deference or like nostalgia, sort of romantic view of the Sultan or of the empire. They might be soldiers that are animated in some cases by religious fervor as well. Although it should be said that the Ottoman army was very mixed. It comprised many Orthodox Christians, Muslims, and Jews as well. But that doesn't mean to say that there wouldn't be soldiers from Anatolia or the Middle East, the Levant, who were maybe sort of animated by religious fervor, because Islam was a central feature of Ottoman identity. So that gives you an idea of the size of the field command. That's pretty impressive. That comprises our mobile field units that are the kind of units that are going to be engaging in pitched battles. And it's just shy of 1 million men, really. It's 191,000. In addition to that are different other kinds of troops. So the other kind are mobile auxiliaries. So mobile auxiliaries are units that are kept in the rear, but they are not fixed units. So they are typically going to be brigade-sized forces, but not always. So they're going to include things like small cavalry brigades containing a couple of regiments. They will include provosts, but provosts that are not stacked in a large command. So we have some provosts, for example, military police, that is, in Greece, whose function is to sort of is to kind of try and suppress revolt risk in the region. They are often coupled with militia brigades, regular, again, or mobile auxiliary formations. In some cases, they might be stacked with Bashi bazooks, as is the case in Janina. Bashi bazooks are paramilitaries. So mobile auxiliaries will comprise mobile small formations. In some cases, they will include division-sized forces. For example, like the Greek occupation force, like the Tripoli division. These are divisions that are, they have to be large enough because of the special conditions of their role. So in Greece, there's a very real risk of revolt. It's essentially an insurgency. Tripoli is obviously of great strategic importance, and because of the fact that the kind of interior of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica is a terra incognita, there's the kind of continuous risk of raids from the south, and we do not want Tripoli to fall. Tripoli is the colonial capital of Libya, so we have a division-sized force. So mobile auxiliaries, they include provosts, they include regular forces, as I say, these kinds of rear echelon small forces that are designed really for policing. They're designed for policing the empire, counter-insurgency role. They also include colonial forces. We don't have a lot of colonial forces, but we do have some colonial detachments. So colonial detachments include the Yemeni native force based in Aden, which is a couple of brigade of native regulars. It also includes in Zanzibar, we have a colonial force, which is comprised of 3 kind of approximate brigade-sized forces, which are the Zanzibar colonials. So now these colonials, they're not like European colonials. They don't dress in Ottoman military uniforms. They pretty much retain their organization and character as if they were independent. But they obviously have Ottoman officers and they are under the command of the Ottoman Empire. But their formations are very atypical. They're not typical of kind of European armies. They're going to be sort of have a very regional kind of character to them. Mobile auxiliaries, which you kind of already mentioned, also include the Bashi bazooks. The Bashi bazooks do still exist. Now, the funny thing is, I mean, 25 years ago, I was talking about eventually decommissioning the Bashi bazooks. It hasn't happened. They do have a purpose. They do have a need as a rear echelon kind of police force. They are a paramilitary force. They have a very long history in the Ottoman Empire. I mean, the Bashi bazooks go right back to the early days, you know, like of Selim and Suleiman. And even though they are paramilitaries, and they very much are paramilitaries, they're not regular military forces. They used to be used as regular military forces, but not for, you know, a long time. They do have a kind of a uniform of sorts. It's like a very colourful, distinctive kind of civilian garb. You'll often find photographs in the Ottoman Empire from the 1850s, 60s and 70s will often be photographs of Bashi bazooks, which creates the impression to anyone that's looking at photographs of the Ottoman Empire that this is what Ottoman soldiers look like, but overwhelmingly they didn't. It's because the Bashi bazooks looked so exotic. They didn't really dress in civilian gear. They had very colourful, distinctive kind of uniforms, you know, that might vary from unit to unit. But by this time, we're using them as paramilitary forces. So that breaks down what comprises mobile auxiliaries. Now, provosts comprise about 2,000, that is to say military police, that are based in cities. So we actually have a constabulary in Constantinople of military police whose entire job is, let's have a look, there we go, the Constantinople military police constabulary. So provost in the empire, not included within the mobile army, within the field command, is 2,000. Colonials, 8,400. Paramilitaries, Bashi bazooks, 76,800. And regular mobile auxiliaries, so cavalry brigades, rear echelon mobile forces comprise 152,500 men. Now, the regular mobile auxiliary is broken into 18 separate brigades, but 5 divisions. And they typically don't have guns. However, the divisions do contain an artillery regiment. Infantry divisions always contain a regiment of artillery. And with 5 divisions, it means that we have approximately, within the mobile auxiliary, 200 to 300 guns, artillery pieces, overwhelmingly concentrated in places like southern Greece and Tripoli and places where we have division-sized forces. So that's the mobile auxiliary. The other auxiliary is the Tier 1 auxiliary. Now, Tier 1 auxiliaries comprise static formations, for the most part. So fortress garrisons, but also town garrisons. These are quite dynamic and interesting forces because some fortress garrison units cannot be moved. They are absolutely fixed into place. So if we go to the Constantinople garrison, you'll see that some of them are fixed. And this comprises, for the most part, the original kind of Constantinople garrison. Other ones, which are units that have been constructed to supplement the garrison, can be moved, but not on foot. So these are sort of category B soldiers. They're in their 40s, they're in their 50s, they've got pot bellies, they're balding. They don't have boots that are designed for, they're not hobble boots, they're not designed for marching, and they don't have any kind of logistical support. They can't carry water supplies, ammunition or food supplies. These are units that are tied, for the most part, to that position. Now, the ones that are fixed, would probably say, are going to be like part-time soldiers. These will be soldiers that would typically kind of bring in the harvest, which is not an unusual thing in the 1870s. They're going to be fixed to a region. They can't be moved because they have a vocation which requires them to fulfill some kind of civilian role in that area. Other kinds of units are fixed insofar as they can't move on foot, but they can be strategically redeployed by rail. So their terms of service allows for redeployment by rail into different parts of the empire in a defensive role. So they're going to be category B soldiers. They might be soldiers that had formed previously in the field army, maybe they lost an eye or a limb, and they're kind of serving as rear echelon category B soldiers. The other kind of variety of tier 1 auxiliaries will be town garrisons, which are much smaller. So town garrisons are permanent military units. They're typically very small. They comprise a few thousand men, and they are professional soldiers that are designed really to protect the limits of that town. And we have a lot of these. We have quite a lot because large parts of our empire, for example, had fairly significant revolt risk. So we invested a lot into garrison forces. We couldn't expand the paramilitary forces because we weren't allowed to build them anymore. They are a legacy kind of our earlier army. But for the most part, revolt risk in the Balkan Peninsula, for example, has been brought largely under control, with some exceptions, as is the case in kind of Eastern Anatolia and the Kurdish and Armenian regions. Again, with some exceptions, we have a small residual revolt risk in Batumi. We have military provost inside the town to try and tackle that. But for the most part, revolt risk is under control, and it does require a large number of forces as garrison units. So Tier 1 auxiliaries are broken again into fortress garrisons. Some are fixed, some are allowed to be redeployed. That force is quite large. It's 975,000 men, so it's like 480,000 men, with about 921 emplaced artillery pieces, and that's broken into kind of emplaced artillery batteries, but also naval guns, especially around the kind of Sea of Marmara and the Bosporus. A lot of that manpower is tied up manning kind of naval guns in kind of emplaced positions. The town garrisons is 66,700 men, so our Tier 1 auxiliary force in total is 167,000. Oh no, I beg your pardon, no it's not. I actually haven't added that up. One moment, let's have a look. So our kind of Tier 1 auxiliaries in total is 479 plus 67,000. You never find a calculator when you need one, can you? Yeah, so Tier 1 auxiliaries then is about 546,000 men. That's including fortress and town garrison units, and yeah, about 900, little under 1,000 kind of guns. So that's quite something. Now, that means that our total standing command of military units that we can see on the map, now that doesn't comprise all of the military forces that exist, is about 1,675,000 men, which is quite something. Slightly more than that. It's maybe 1,676,000 men. That is the size of our standing army, and yeah, about half of that, or slightly more than half, is tied up in the field army. So it's actually, these are mobile forces, which is pretty impressive. Now, for a sense of perspective, the Ottoman army in the 1877 war, which is a few years after now, was its total strength, including rear echelon forces, the Redif forces, and garrison forces, was thought to be about 600,000 to 800,000. So we have an army that is more than twice the size of the real Ottoman army. Now, there is another kind of component, which would be Tier 2 auxiliary forces. These are not visible on the map, but for example, towns with depots, or even just large enough towns, and also towns with fortresses, have the capacity to levy some forces that are in the locale. Now, some of these would be former soldiers that could quickly be given weapons and uniforms that have served, that reside in the town. They can be mobilized very quickly for the purpose of the town's defense. Some of them will be depot soldiers. There will be soldiers that will be armed. They will carry a rifle, but their job is that they are logisticians. They really work inside the depot, but in the event that the city is besieged, they can function as infantry. They supplement the town's defense. Now, you only really see these troops when a town is besieged. So, for example, in Sarajevo, right now, the Sarajevo garrison is, about 39,000 men plus 64 guns, okay? Now, if Sarajevo was besieged, that would inflate. And there's a little bit of variation between city and town, depending on the size of the city or town, depending on what's in the city. So a city or town, for example, with a larger depot, generates a much larger kind of like levied force. Larger and more modern fortifications have the facility probably to stockpile more weapons. They have a larger magazine, so they can recruit a larger portion of the local male population also to serve as kind of Tier 2 auxiliaries. So these are soldiers that are only really used. They will also include administrative soldiers. In some cases, they'll probably include prisoners. They might include prisoners that have an Ottoman officer that are used to do donkey work inside the depot, but they can be given a rifle and given some kind of training in the event that a town or a city is besieged. Now, I can only guess what the size of that force is, but my gut would be that that force would comprise 100 to 200,000 men, which would bring the overall size of the Ottoman army up in terms of the number of potential soldiers that it could have to maybe, I would say maybe 1,800,000, something like that. So it's considerably larger than the real Ottoman army. It's considerably larger. That's pretty much it. That's the size of the Ottoman army. In terms of the navy, I did do a quick breakdown of the navy as well, which is quite interesting. So the navy has a total sort of size in terms of manpower of 86,236 men. Now, 26,596 of those serve on warships. 5,760 are in the transport fleet, which gives us a kind of floating manpower strength of 32,356,000. That doesn't include the maritime marine. I've not counted the merchant marine, but I could do. They are technically civilians. Now, some merchantmen are armed. They do have guns, but they are nevertheless civilians. They're not really counted within the naval strength. But the navy additionally has 53,880 marines serving in brigade-sized forces, spread over I think about 8 marine brigades, bringing the navy strength up to 86,236. So that in the navy actually has more marines than it does kind of sailors. And these are spread over a range of different craft. But to give you an idea of the character, the size of the Ottoman navy, the Ottoman navy currently has 4 being a squadron, 4 wooden screw WSF wooden screw frigates, currently in the process of being decommissioned, 4 traditional wooden battleships, pure Age of Sail, no screw, is still in the service, so 1 squadron of battleships, 4 wooden corvettes, plus 4 wooden frigates. The navy also includes 12 wooden screw corvettes, so they have auxiliary sails, they are timber, but they do have a screw for propulsion. So 12 wooden screw corvettes, 12 ironclad gunboats, which are river boats, although they really function as patrol craft in the Dardanelles, the Bosporus, 16 ironclad corvettes, 12 ironclad frigates, 4 ironclad battleships currently in construction. And I kind of mentioned before, these battleships, they're not going to be like battleships, they're not like the Age of Sail battleships. They wouldn't be like modern early 20th century battleships. They're going to be like really, really large frigates. There weren't really any ironclad battleships built. But so these are very large, very experimental ships. So 4 ironclad battleships in construction, 4 ironclad frigates in construction, and 4 ironclad corvettes in construction. That gives us a total combat power of 80 ships, 4 in the process of being decommissioned and 16 in the process of being constructed. In addition to that, the Navy has 48 heavy lift steam transports and 112 paddle steamer transports that are included in the transport fleet. So these are smaller transports that support the main transport fleet, but they are limited to coastal regions. So the complete strength then of the transport fleet is 240 ships. It means the total strength of the Ottoman Navy by ship count is at this point 320 commissioned ships. That's the size of the Navy, and like I say, I didn't actually include the merchant Navy. I could have done that, it would have been interesting. Now this, again, I think the Ottoman Navy, I would imagine, I'm not sure what size the Ottoman Navy, my hunch is that the Ottoman Navy is a similar size to the Ottoman Navy in real life, although I would hazard a guess, I don't know, that the Navy probably contains more ironclads than it did in real life in 1874. My hunch is that that is the case, and the Navy now contains more ironclad ships than it contains traditional Age of Sail or wooden screw ships. So it is now predominantly, it's a contemporary Navy, and all of those ships have been built in Constantinople, and in the 1850s we laid the basis intentionally for the Ottoman Empire to have the capacity to build large, modern, industrial-sized ships, because in real life, the Ottomans did build some of their ironclads, but many of them were built by the British. Now, the facility doesn't exist in-game for that to happen, I don't think, unless there are scripted events. I think that was something else that they were going to include in the game, incidentally. I think they were going to include a facility for, which would have been amazing, because it was such a feature of the 19th century, of foreign powers building ships. But anyway, we developed the capacity to build our own ironclads, and we've done just that. So, it's a modern Navy, and we're on the cusp of a lot of technologies also that will allow for the construction of even more modern ships. So the Navy hasn't really expanded, but has been modernized, and is now over the kind of, over the hill, really, it's kind of, we're over the worst of it in terms of kind of naval modernization. You can see our state revenue is much diminished now. We had at one point a stockpile of many thousands of gold blocks. That has in the last year diminished significantly, partly because of investments in fortifications, partly because of the ongoing sort of naval investment program, but also actually now Academy of Sciences. A huge amount of it is invested in Academy of Sciences. The Ottoman army, I don't think has expanded that much in the last decade, in an odd way. We kind of reached quite quickly the size of the army that we have now. Maybe 10 years ago, it was 200,000-300,000 men smaller, but it wasn't significantly smaller. A lot of our army expansion was done in the 1850s, and again, the thing that allowed for this is a large, modern, burgeoning industrial economy. It's that gives us the tax revenue, and it gives us the tax revenue in lots of different ways. In a lot of ways you get double bubble with tax, like you get maritime tax from imports, exports, tariff tax from imports, excise tax, census tax, corporate tax. There's a lot of different kind of tax sliders. We've got very high tariffs, very stiff tariffs in place. That puts pressure on our foreign relations, but we did that to protect our kind of economy whilst it was growing. And I can give you a comparison of the size of our economy in February compared to, for example, 1859, which is, 15 years ago? 15 years ago. So February 1874, our exports, for example, is 300 units of goods at a total value of 2,602. Now, if we compare that to April 1859, our export value, we exported 100 units of goods, so a third of what we're exporting now, but for only a value of 305. So the value of goods that we're selling has increased fivefold, but the actual numbers of commodities, the actual is threefold, which is impressive. So the economy is significantly larger than it was. I'd say 3-4 times larger than 15 years ago. Imports 15 years ago was 20 units of goods for a value of 82. Imports in February 74 is 187 units of goods for a value of 608. So we import a lot more than we did as well. Domestic market sales 15 years ago was 109 units of goods for a total value of 386. In February 1874, not all of February, but one term, like the last term, we sold 390 units of goods, so almost 4 times the total number of goods for a value of 1,617 compared to 386. So that gives you an idea as the size of the economy and the complete value of stock. So this is all the commodities that is actually held in our inventory, that has not been exported, that is basically sitting in warehouses. In February 1874 is 18,636. In April 1859, the value of stock was 5,439. If we go back to 1851, the value of stock was 3,269. Domestic market sales, 57 units sold for 232 as opposed to 390 sold for 1,600. So it's the economy is many times larger, and it's only that. It's that brass tax really that allows us to sustain such a significant military force. And it's that's allowed us to do much better than the Ottomans have done in real life in the last 15 years. And long may it continue. So anyway, that's the kind of army report. Maybe I'll do this every 10 or 15 years or something. Be interesting to see how the army develops and grows. I think the army in 1850, the field command would have been no more than 250,000 men. It couldn't have been more than 250,000 men. So the field army has increased by fourfold, almost fourfold since then. The mobile auxiliaries, the paramilitaries were all there, but the mobile auxiliaries were limited really only to paramilitaries. So the mobile auxiliaries in 1850 would have been 76,000, maybe 85,000, because a few of the Bashi bazooks were decommissioned and destroyed. So the mobile auxiliaries, which now sit at 237,000 or 238,000, 25 years ago or 24 years ago would have been about 80,000. So fortress garrisons, which now are 479,000, have more than doubled in size, because most of the fortress garrison units can be strategically redeployed. They're not fixed units. So probably it's increased by 4 or 5-fold, you know, so the army's significantly expanded. So anyway, that is the army report, a bit of an economy report. It gives you a bit of a kind of feel for where we are 14 years into the campaign, and a year or so before, I guess, the kind of demise of Abdelaziz, which is going to be on the cards soon. And, you know, it's quite an achievement. I think we've done really well. Constantinople hasn't fallen. We've experienced defeats in the field, but not really, really significant defeats. We've experienced reversals. The last war was touch and go, and we're likely going to be confronted with further warfare against the Austrians. But if ever the Ottoman Empire had the means to fight a serious war against Austria, it's now. And I feel confident with our defensive plan based around the quadrilateral, with good rail access to the arsenal at Adrianople, plus our system of upgrading fortresses, of calcifying. It's kind of a continuation of a policy of Abdul Masih, really. His policy was a policy of defensive militarization of the Balkan Peninsula. We eventually not abandoned it entirely, but we achieved the quadrilateral, and then, you know, we focused on things like make sure that, you know, that Sarajevo is fortified. But we took a much more offensive approach to Austria, precisely because we had the ability to do that, because we'd become, you know, our wars have been so successful against Austria that we became a little bit complacent with regard to fortifications. We're now going to focus on a big program of continuous fortification in the Balkan Peninsula. One point of note is that we do have a new commander. He's a 2-star general, and he came into service, I think, in December. It might have been January, and that is his full name was Deli Fuat Pasha. He was an Egyptian, but obviously served in the Ottoman army. Now, he has very good stats. He starts off with an offensive value of 4, so he is an aggressive commander. His characteristics, a tactician of Elan, and a strong disciplinarian, and these are the things that you want to see, and he does not have an abilities malus. So this guy is an absolute candidate for superstar status. And here's the rub. Deli Fuad Pasha, a bit like, I'm trying to think of the other general, I think it's this guy, Abed Mukhtar. Abed Mukhtar is only about 40, and he died in the 1920s, and he was a general, I think, in the First World War. Now, Abed Mukhtar is a good commander, he's a good all-rounder, but his abilities are mostly defensive in character, and he does have a malus. He's overcautious, but overcautious is fine for a defensive commander, to be fair, and he's more a defensive commander. He's 40, and both of these men, both he and Deli Fuad Pasha, both of these men are very young. I think Deli Fuad Pasha is 38 or 39. This is a very young age for a staff officer. It's it's not very typical for a staff officer to be of this kind of age. They both live very long lives. They both die just after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, Deli Fuad Pasha might die in the 30s, I can't remember, but he's like in his 90s when he dies. So both of these commanders are good, especially Deli Fuad Pasha, and yeah, and they're going to be in the Ottoman army. Pretty much, they're going to be with us for the duration of the campaign, which is amazing when you consider that we've got like 50 years to go. You know, it's absolutely incredible. So that's really exciting. It's good to have a 2-star come through that has that kind of like, you know, that kind of magic dust about him. So I'm quite excited for this general to be sort of developed and cultivated into a full field command. And we've already managed to get Abed Mukhtar into 3-star status, and he's in command of the 6th Army. So he's already a 3-star, and again, he should remain a 3-star. Again, if they don't die in battle, if they don't get nailed in a battle, you know. But that's good. And we are going to probably be looking at a number of generals retire, and not just retire. So, for example, Hussein Avni Pasha of the 2nd Army, he is not just a 3-star general. Spoiler alert, he is a political operator, and at the moment I think he's the sitting Grand Vizier. So as well as being the nominal commander of the 2nd Army, he probably spends much of his time in Constantinople sort of conniving and plotting. So he's a political operator as well. This is the case with a few of the Ottoman generals, you know, but there's a good chance that he will be sort of retired from service in the near future. Plus we've got Abdul Karim Nadir, who's an old-timer. He's been with us since 1850. Can't think where he is. I mean, he was a 2-star, you know, 25 years ago, so God knows how old he is. Plus Abdi Pasha, who was also a 2-star 15 years ago. So both of these guys are going to be pushing on. I mean, unless they were very young, I mean, even if they're in their 40s, I would guess that they'll be in their sort of, you know, well, yeah, even if they're 40s, they'll be in their mid-60s now. So, like, yeah, good chance that a couple of these commanders are going to be retiring, and hopefully we'll have competent replacements. that's pretty much it. So a bit of a kind of special report then. That gives a bit of a kind of report on the kind of size and the nature of the Ottoman army and the economy. Next report, I mean, we're in February 1874 now, so the next kind of report is going to be, I don't know, 3-4 months time, probably maybe May, unless there's nothing at all to report. Maybe I'll push it back to June or July. So there'll be another report anyway during the kind of the sunny season of 1874. So until then, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.